All back. Are you streaming, Patrick? Okay. All right, good. I want to welcome you all back and looking forward to one last opportunity to have some time together and hopefully answer a few questions that you have. I don't know that I can answer probably the most important questions that you have, which are things like what comes next. So let me answer what I can. I do know that the administrative board met last night with Dr. McCullough, who is our district superintendent, but I was not there for the meeting. So I don't know where it stands, and I'm sure that they will share updates as there are updates to share and as they can. But I know that that means that the process is well underway, and the cabinet has managed transitions before. If I am not mistaken, I think we have a couple of changes coming up to the schedule over the next couple of weeks, so let me share those with you. The first one is that the show that is scheduled for this weekend, I think, if I remember correctly, I heard that there were only 4 people who had bought tickets for Friday night, somewhere between 20 and 30 for Saturday. So I think they're going to combine the shows and just have one show on Saturday night. If I understand that right, and we should have a communication go out about that later today. Debbie Schultz was going to cook for us, but Debbie Schultz is unfortunately ill, as is everyone in her house, and we understandably, did not think it would be a good idea for her to come in and prepare your food. So I think we're looking now at catering that, and the last I heard was that they'd be looking at bringing in Olive Garden for that meal. So I think it'll be a good meal. I think it'll be a good show. If you've not purchased tickets yet, I hope you'll consider that. Let's see, other things. We're going to have one service on Sunday, and that will be in the chapel. And that is really primarily just to make it so that Curtis and Patrick, who do all the work of setting up and tearing down chairs and tables, don't have to do that late Saturday night and then turn right back around and come in on Sunday morning. So we're just going to have one service there. And then on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, we'll have one service on Christmas Eve, and that stuff's all around the church. I think that one's at 5:30. One service on Christmas Day, which will be at 10, and both of those services are going to be in here. So Christmas Eve and Christmas Day are both going to be right in here in the Ministry Center. So I hope you'll put that stuff on your calendar, and I hope you'll join us. I think it'll be a good opportunity for us to celebrate the holidays together. All right, so I would have loved to have finished out the story of Genesis with you, but unfortunately it would take us about another half of a year to get through the whole thing. So you're going to have to do one of two things, and I'm sorry to ask this of you. One is read it yourself. The other is trust that the story of Genesis does actually come to a close and transition into Exodus, which it does. There's about 50 chapters to the book of Genesis. It's one of the larger books in the Bible, and it's one of the reasons that I've rarely tackled it during my time in ministry, because it takes a long time to get through. But it's been a fun time to do that. We've spent the vast majority of this year together in that book, and I think we've had an opportunity to have some really good conversations. One of the things I wanted to share with you, and I've been asked this question, and I'm sure there are many other people who also have the question. The question is, what are we going to do about Thursday morning Bible studies? I want you to know, without a doubt, that this has been one of the things I have enjoyed the most about my ministry. I think I started this like a year or so after I came to Southern Hills. Many of you have been involved since the beginning of the Bible study. And with the exception of the pandemic, we've run straight through. We've studied a lot of books together. I was looking through the list of them just the other day and remembering teaching about them. But I want you to know that Thursday morning has been a morning that I have really looked forward to throughout my time here at Southern Hills. And so I want to thank you for being faithful, for coming week after week after week, for watching on the weeks you couldn't be here. I've really enjoyed being together with you. I've enjoyed your questions and the dialogue that we've had. But the question that I've received is, will it continue? My answer is, there's absolutely no reason that it should not continue. Whoever it is that the cabinet selects to replace me will want to know what the regular schedule of the church currently is. And so Michelle and the administrative board and our staff will all help to bring that pastor up to speed with what the normal schedule is. Unless there's some kind of unforeseen conflict, if that pastor, whomever it is, knows that you like this time, there's no reason it wouldn't continue. So I'll ask that be communicated through Michelle and the board and others. But you also might want to share that with your pastor as well when that happens. And maybe you could, so you got a couple options here. You could pick up right where you left off. Be like, this is where we were in Genesis. Let's start here and keep going, or you guys can start something new together. But I don't see any reason why Thursday morning Bible studies should not continue after the holiday. All right, we're going to spend some time together. I'm not going to try to take you through the remaining, about 15, 16, 17 chapters of Genesis today. In the short version of that is Joseph is born. Joseph goes to Egypt. Joseph stays in Egypt till the Exodus starts and brings his family there after there's a drought, which is what you already know about the story. That story actually ends with Joseph's death and his admonition to remove his bones from Egypt whenever the Israelites leave. And then the Exodus begins with a new Pharaoh coming to power who didn't know Joseph, and so has a different orientation toward the Hebrew people. But today, I want to spend some time giving you the opportunity to ask questions that you would like to know the answer to, so I hope you gave some thought to that and came with a few of them. Questions about religion or about your faith, and you're in a unique position because I'm exiting ministry. So I'll probably answer any of the questions that you asked today, no matter what they are, so I hope you'll bring up some good ones. As I always say, though, Scriptures are holy, and before we consider them, we should pray, so let's do that together. God, we're grateful today for the opportunity to be here and for all of the Thursday mornings that we have spent together over the years. We're grateful for the ways in which we've come to know more about who you are and more about who you're calling us to be. I pray, God, that you would continue to bless this time and these people as this congregation moves forward. I pray that this would continue to be a meaningful time, an opportunity for study and for growth and for fellowship. And I pray that you would continue to guide us toward taking just one more step on the path to becoming who you're calling us to be. This I ask in your name. Amen. Okay, somebody have a question? Who came with a question already thought of? All right, go for it. Oh, okay. That's probably the number one question. As I have shared with so many people so far, and as you can imagine, I have had to wait for the organization that I'm going to let its staff know and its board of directors know, and that happened yesterday. The communications went out yesterday. So I'll check in with them at the end of the week and see if it's all right. They needed to make sure that all of their staff and the entire board knows that I'm coming there before. There are, surprisingly, there are people who know other people. Thank you. Thank you for that. Well, I have enjoyed. Been a lot of folks have been here for a long, long time. So, well, we did. First class I ever taught was in the CLC, and it was, I think I started the Epic of Eden in there. First time I used that here. Talked about it once or twice since then, and that was the day that my daughter talked me into getting my first pair of Converse, and I was wearing them in that Bible study. It was also, incidentally, I think it was, no, my birthday was later. That was a fun time. Then we moved from there into the chapel. We were in the chapel for a while, and then later into here. So, but thank you. I have enjoyed very much having the opportunity to teach. So understanding that, thank you. I enjoy that, and it's something that I have always enjoyed, so thank you for that. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. I'm glad. I'm glad. Something like that. An hour in the scriptures, I think, something like that. Yeah, yeah. Thank you. I appreciated that. Oh, you're talking about the videos we did. Okay. Yeah, I don't remember what we called those. Thursdays with Matt or something like that. Yeah, that was hard to do, but thank you. As I've said, I've enjoyed being with you all too. I don't know. I doubt it. Probably not. But I have been told never to say never. Every time somebody asks me if I think I'm going to do something in the future, I remember that my wife told me that one day she told her family that she would never marry a soldier. So I'm real careful about saying something like that, but I don't intend to. Right. Yeah, don't ever say your kids won't do something. John, did you have a question? Okay. Sure. No, okay, good question. Actually, there is a license. Like, for instance, while Bo was here, he had a license. And no, that is, the way that works is that's renewable by your denomination. When you're ordained, which is what I am, you get a different document. And you have to take either one of those things over to the county courthouse and put it on file. And then they make a record of it in a book, and then they give you a card that shows the number of the book in the county that you registered in and the line number that they have you registered. And it is that information that has to go on things like wedding certificates. So they don't issue you, the state doesn't issue you a license. That comes from your faith group. And then if it is a faith group recognized by the state, then they will register those credentials. No, oddly, you don't. All my stuff is still registered in Bryan County, which is the first place I ever did that. You don't have to move them. A lot of people do, but you don't have to. In fact, I probably still have that card in my wallet. So no, the state doesn't issue a license, but in Oklahoma is a state where anyone can officiate a funeral, but not anyone can officiate a wedding. Yeah. I wish I knew the answer to that. Again, the administrative board met last night with my district superintendent, Dr. McCullough, and that started the process of figuring out the change. And so I haven't had any updates yet from the board. So the best I can share is twofold. One is I have every faith and confidence that the board will update the church soon. The other is you'll probably know before I do who is coming. But I can tell you what I think is likely, just based on how these kinds of transitions are normally handled. Several options. One would be that lay speakers fill in for a short period of time. One would be that an interim pastor is appointed here while they're working to bring the permanent pastor. Normally, that's a retired clergy person who lives in the area. Or if they have someone who can move quickly, they'll move that person quickly. It'll probably be one of those three things, would be my guess. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to keep, we call them, I know that this is all confusing. Just so you know what I'm saying, we call them credentials. And so I'll be keeping my credentials, at least for the time being, because both of my unmarried daughters would like me to officiate their weddings. After that point, I'm not sure yet. Kate and I will probably revisit that when the time comes. We have a set date for one of those weddings. but not, Robin's going to have to find someone and get, engaged and then set a date before I know anything about the other one. But they would both like me to do that, which is understandable. My father married my siblings and I, so. Have I ever told you that story? When ministers say that, we'll say, I married so-and-so, right? But that's not how we should say it. We should say, I officiated so-and-so's wedding. But our slang is, I married so-and-so, right? And what we mean is I officiated. Well, we're living in Topeka, Kansas. Now, we moved away from Topeka after my first grade year. So I don't know how young I was. It's an early memory for me. But Dad was leaving on a Saturday. And I asked Mom, he walked out the door, said goodbye, walked out the door, he was on his work clothes, and drove off, and asked Mom where he was going. And Mom said he was going to marry some people at the church. And I got so upset because he was already married to my mom. I was like, why is he marrying somebody else? I was beside myself. My mom had to explain that that's not what it meant. So, what other questions do you have? All of these are good ones. I would love to answer them if I can. I know the stepping into a transition is hard because of the uncertainty, but they will take good care of you. You will. You will. You'll walk through it, and I think it will. I think it will be a good thing. Yes, I'm sorry. Okay. If you're watching, the question is, why do Methodists feel like it's necessary to change pastors out of a church all the time? I would love to answer that by saying, I have a list of the top 10 things that I wonder why Methodists think are necessary. But to answer your question, this is not your first day with me, so you're going to get a long answer here. All right. That evolved. Now, there's a very practical reason, and I'll give you that last. But it evolved. The way that we move, the name for that is itinerancy. So we itinerate from church to church. That's a word that's not really used outside of the church anymore, but it just means to move, right? When our movement began, as many of you know, the Methodist movement came out of the Church of England. In England, that is also called the Anglican Church. In America, it is called the Episcopal Church, or the Episcopalian Church. Methodism was a movement out of the Church of England. John Wesley was an Anglican priest in England. Well, when the movement started, Wesley had no plan to make it a denomination. At least he told people he didn't. During the Revolutionary War, England recalled its priests. And so there was no one in the States to serve communion. And at that time, Methodists, who were starting to be called that, they were meeting as societies, which you would think of as like small groups. That was their word for small groups. And there were societies that met about everything during that time, not just religion, but they were just meeting as small groups. And they were meeting within Episcopalian parishes. Well, there was nobody to serve communion. And this network of Methodist small groups had grown a lot in Europe and in America. So Wesley ordains a couple of people, Coke and Asbury, Thomas Coke and Francis Asbury, to come over to the U.S. and start ordaining ministers so that the sacraments can be served. And that's the big rub between the United Methodist Church and the Church of England right now. So at the time, there were not very many ordained ministers. So they would, most of them had farms of their own, plantations of their own. They would plant and harvest. And in between those cycles, they would itinerate on their circuit. And their circuit would include anywhere from 2 or 3 to up to 20 churches. So they would go. If you've ever heard stories about how in the old days, churches would meet in the morning, they'd eat lunch, they'd meet in the afternoon for a while. So you'd spend all day doing all your church stuff. Or brush arbor meetings. A lot of that happened in our movement because the minister was only going to come through once every so often. Minister may come through today, and you may not see a minister again for a while, which means that when your church is meeting, the lay people in the church are rotating through giving a sermon of some kind, right? But you can't have the sacraments or anything like that because the minister's not there. They called that itinerating on a circuit. When we developed more clergy, they moved from this process of having a big circuit that was coordinated by a bishop. The bishop said, this minister is going to have this circuit. This minister is going to have this circuit. The more ministers they got, the smaller those circuits became. We still have a version of that today. We call them 2 and 3. There are 2, 3, 4, and 5-point charges, which means that there are ministers who preach at 5 churches on a Sunday morning, which is crazy to me. That's kind of what that came down to. But now we have enough ministers that, for the most part, it's 1 minister per church. But the way that is controlled remained the same. The bishop, along with the cabinet, the district superintendents, handle appointments. Here's why ministers move. One of 2 reasons. Either there's a problem. The minister and the congregation don't get along. And that's a blunt way of saying it, but it's direct and it's true. And it's just time for a change, right? But more often than not, it's because of this. And when it feels like ministers are moving through your churches at a rapid pace. The average used to be 3 to 5 years. The previous bishop we had in Oklahoma tried to lengthen that to an average of 7 or so years. This bishop hasn't really said much about tenure. But it feels like, people go through, why don't they just stay here for 20 years? Here's why. Because we are one organization, and you may not know this, but up until, I think it was like 10 or 12 years ago, the United Methodist Church had the 2nd largest pension in the United States of any organization. That's how big it is, right? So our bosses, my boss is the DS, and his boss is the bishop. Our bosses control where we go, right? So let's say you have a church that is small. Let me just give my path, right? So I'm going to serve at a church in Stroud. Stroud has about 2,500 people, and not in the church, in the town. Well, I moved from Stroud to Marlow, which is a town of just under 10,000 people. I moved from Marlow to Oklahoma City, which is the largest city in Oklahoma, right? Predictably, the churches in those communities their size is normally relative to their community, except for when you get into Oklahoma City, and then it varies. So here's what happens. Let's go backwards. Matt moves from Southern Hills, right? And it creates a vacancy. They need to fill that vacancy. Most of the time, they're going to fill that vacancy, obviously, with their ordained clergy, right? They're going to look and try to figure out who is a good fit, which is part of what that meeting was about last night. They come and say, what do you need? Where's the church? Give us a feel for the church, impression for, tell us what you need, what's important to you. Then they look for clergy that are effective and skilled at the things the board said that they needed, right? So they find that person. But most of the time, they're going to find a skilled, effective clergy person that is at a church one step down from where this church is. So that means, essentially, if you want to talk about it in any other organizational terms, somebody's about to get promoted to come here. Well, when they get promoted to come here, there's going to be a vacancy in their church that has to be filled. Most likely, assuming some relative level of health, somebody else will get promoted into that position. Does that make sense? Okay. So the frequency with which ministers move has a lot to do with location and where you are on that track. There are 2 places in the United Methodist Church that clergy tend to stick around a long time. One is if they become a licensed pastor, which is what Bo was when he was here, in their hometown, their small hometown. Normally, those ministers just want to stay put in their community where they live, and they're usually quarter-time, part-time, they have another job or run a business or have a farm or something like that. The other reason that ministers stay put is because they have gotten to the upper end of that chain. They've been promoted as far as they can go, and there's nowhere else for them to go. Those ministers tend to be at larger churches, and they stay there usually until they retire, unless there is, unless is the wrong word. A lot of time, the top churches, the largest churches anywhere in Oklahoma, are not so substantially different from one another that if a vacancy opened in one, you'd take a look at a minister at another one because they wouldn't want to move. Wouldn't be worth their time. Does that make sense? So the answer to that question is that happens mostly because a minister is getting promoted from one level of church to another level of church. And I think our average right now in Oklahoma is like 5 to 7 years that happens. Now, there's been a lot of talk in the United Methodist Church about whether that's a good thing or not a good thing. I think it's like most things. I think there's some good things about it and some bad things about it. When you have a congregational church that's not one organization, like the United Methodist Church, they go out and they find their own ministers, right? If you're not a mega church, then the quality of the person you're bringing in is not normally, it varies. Let me just say it varies. Mega churches have the ability to do that because like any other organization, A, they're an attractive offer, and B, they have the finances to be able to pay appropriately. Smaller sized congregations, it's real difficult to attract people. One of the reasons why is because the church, regardless of most denominations, the Pentecostal denominations you can exclude from this, the church is education heavy. So you've got ministers who are spending a ton of money on education, and then the salaries of the church don't match how much you had to spend to get your degree. So it's really difficult if you're at a medium-sized church or a small church to be able to attract somebody who has the right credentials because they're needing to pay their bills like anybody else is, and usually the salaries are pretty low. So, yeah. Oh, no. No, they didn't. They haven't tried to move me. I'm not convinced that very well may have happened this year, but no. No, your administrative board did not ask me to leave, and the cabinet didn't ask me to move either. So I have an opportunity to do something I really want to do. Yeah. Okay. I thought that was probably going to happen. Okay. Okay, good question. If you're watching, John said he had a friend at St. Andrews. They had a meeting last night to affiliate with the Global Methodist Church. What does that mean, and who are we? We are in the United Methodist Church. The Global Methodist Church is the name of the new denomination that formed as a result of the split. The Wesley Covenant Association, which is the very conservative branch of Methodism, split away from the church, formed a new denomination called the GMC. The GMC is a denomination that officially was founded, I think, in 2021, and it is the place that, if you want to look at it this way, all of the clergy in the churches who are not inclusive are going into that denomination and away from the United Methodist Church. So it is a brand new denomination. The United Methodist Church is the version of the church that came from the merger of the Methodist Episcopal Church and the Evangelical United Brethren in, 1969, I think? So what you are a part of is the evolution of what Wesley started here in the U.S. The GMC is a brand new denomination that formed a year ago for, I'm going to say, and I think this is fair, ultra-conservative churches have gone that direction. DA he falls into that. I like DA a lot, but he falls into that category. Yeah. Their structure is different. So their structure is different and has less to do with, there's less authority in the hierarchy and more authority in the local church. And again, I said a minute ago, I think it's like our connectional system, I think, is like most things. There's some good things and some bad things. If you go the other direction, there's some good things and some bad things. And I think it remains to be seen how they'll weather it. Yeah, I'm going to keep my ordination will remain in the United Methodist Church. Yeah. Say again? Well, I don't get that whole pension. It did. It's not any longer, but it was for quite some time. The churches that leave, if you hear about churches having to pay to leave, a lot of that money is going to their unfunded pension liability because they have an amount that they would have continued to pay in that would have essentially gone to support the clergy that have retired out of their congregation. So that's figured into the pension that was committed to the clergy that had served at their church. So a lot of what they're paying is their obligation to make sure that they make good on their commitment to those clergy people to make sure their pensions are funded. Got a lot of questions, and I'm going to get to everybody. John's hand I think I saw next, and then I'll go to Becky. Yes, she was. Stephanie? I don't. Stephanie's kids attend that church. Stephanie doesn't go there. Yeah. When Stephanie and Phil go to church now, they either go to Crossings or they go to, there's another Church of God down here. What is it called? Help me out. No. No, we have rules in the conference that prohibit the minister who's leaving from staying at that church. Frankly, you can see them. It's just not a kind thing to do to the pastor that's coming in. That pastor needs to have an opportunity to build their own set of relationships with people. We will, in order to keep my credentials, I have to affiliate with a church somewhere in the conference. It's got to be United Methodist Church because the Global Methodist Church is not a part of us. It's a completely different thing. I don't know where we're going to affiliate yet. Kate and we don't actually have to figure all that out till annual conference. We're talking about it right now. I think we have an idea, but we'll wait and figure it out. We are. We'll continue. Yes, we'll continue to be Methodist. United Methodist. Let me say that. Yeah. Okay. I said I would come to Becky next, and then I'll go over to Kathy. That's a good question. The churches that are leaving, what if they decide that they don't want to pay money, the money that's asked of them? Well, as of right now, they can't leave if they don't pay it. However, there's a lawsuit that's been filed by 38 churches in the North Carolina, I think it's North Carolina or Western North Carolina annual conference, that seeks to allow for disaffiliation without having to pay. The courts will take that up, and it'll be interesting to see how they rule. Because if they rule in favor of the churches that are filing that petition, that'll set a precedent, obviously. If they don't, things will stay the way they are. But right now, if a church doesn't want to pay, the people can leave and start another congregation in another building. But the building stays with the church, with United Methodist Church. Kathy? Ish, yeah. No, I have some, yeah. I have some pension benefits there. Yeah, I've got pension benefits. We're a combination of pension benefits combined with a nonprofit version of a 401k is called a 403b, and so we have both of those things. I'll get as much of it, as I'm due according to the time I've served. Yeah. If you go, sure. Yes. All right, so some of you have heard me talk about this. The question is, how are we related through the Episcopal Church to the Catholic Church? And our affirmation of faith talks about the Catholic Church. Okay, so yes, we are. We are derived from the Catholic Church, not through the Protestant Reformation. We come through what is called the English Reformation, which is when the Church of England breaks away from the Roman Catholic Church and starts its own church. That happens because the Pope won't annul a marriage for a king in England, so he starts his own church, becomes the head of the church. England or what is properly the UK today, goes back and forth between what people often call Protestant and Catholic for a long time, but the English Reformation has really very little to do with the Protestant Reformation. It's a totally different thing. So eventually the Church of England is formed, and eventually out of the Church of England, the United Methodist Church. So a lot of the liturgies are really similar, and that's why. What was your other question? Lost me. I know you asked another question there. Do we come from the Roman Catholic Church? Yes, yes we do. If you go back far enough, it is. That polity is all a part of that. Oh, Catholic. You said the word Catholic. Originally, there were what, 5 patriarchs of different churches around the world, and the church in Rome was one. The Bishop of Rome was the primary patriarch of all of the different churches, and those churches were called Orthodox Catholic churches. That was the name of the church. When the split happened between Catholicism and Orthodoxy in 1153, 51, 53, 1053, when that happened, the churches in the East, it's like they split the whole name, because the name of those churches is still Orthodox Catholic Church. So like what you call the Roman Catholic Church is properly called the Orthodox Catholic Church of Rome. That's its name. The Orthodox Catholic Church of Greece is another name. But we refer to most of the churches in the East now just with the word Orthodox, and the church in Rome just with the word Catholic. Orthodox means right practice. Catholic means global, worldwide. And so when we say the Holy Catholic Church, we're talking about the church worldwide, all of the church, not the Roman Catholic Church. And it's easy it's hard to understand that, let me say that, because of the way that the word usage has changed. Yeah, it means the global Christian church. Yeah, that's what Catholic means. Yes? Okay, go for it. Mm-hmm. I still expect that they'll come and volunteer with our outreach after the first of the year, which was their original plan. And that is First United Methodist Church, downtown OKC. I still expect that they will do that. Well, I don't know. I don't know. I heard over the weekend that other churches have entered into the discernment process about disaffiliation. So, and have already communicated to the cabinet that they have. And so I expect that will continue. So I really don't know. I wish I did. That's which churches disaffiliate is something that I'll be interested to continue to follow. Mm-hmm. You know, the way I wrote that grant, I didn't require that the trailer be gifted to a United Methodist Church. So the outreach board can choose to gift that to whomever they want. So just keep that in mind. And I'll certainly dig into that as much as we need to at the board meeting that we have, but that was kind of on purpose. Yeah. Y'all are asking some good questions, which is not unusual. Say again. Absolutely. Ghosts. Okay. All right, ghosts. Are ghosts real? That's a good question. Let's take a poll. If you think ghosts are real, raise your hand. If you think they're not real, raise your hand. If you have no idea, raise your hand. Okay. All right. Has anybody been here for any of the teachings I've given about the 3 days? Why there are 3 days? A few of us? Okay. I'm going to start there. There are, in ancient Israel had a belief that predates ancient Israel. Don't know how far back it goes. But it is a belief that the spirits of the dead walk the earth for about 3 days. But that is because that 3-day time frame was believed to be the amount of time that it took the body to go to decay more than it could house the spirit. So 3 days became kind of a generalized rule. Spirits of the dead walk the earth for 3 days. That is why the scriptures contain an admonition not to talk or commune with the spirits of the dead. If the Holy Scripture, if the scriptural faith we practice did not believe that that was a possibility or a reality, nothing I'm about to tell you would be contained in the scriptures, and that's the first one. Don't talk to the spirits of the dead. Why do you need to tell me that if there are no spirits of said dead people for me to talk to? It's just a moot point, right? But there are other occurrences in the Bible that give us an indication of that belief. One of them, some of y'all will know this because I've taught it. One of them happens when Peter is miraculously released from prison. This happens in the book of Acts. He goes back after he's released supernaturally by, if I'm not mistaken, by angels, as long as I'm not in the wrong passage. He goes back to where the apostles are staying, the home that they're staying in. He goes and he knocks on the door, and a servant girl opens it up. The scriptures give her name. I can't remember what it is. It's the only thing she's known for throughout history. And she sees Peter there, and she slams the door in his face. You and I would most likely assume that she would be overjoyed to see Peter there, except that the scriptures tell us that she's afraid that it is his ghost that has come back. Meaning that meaning that there's a belief that he died and his spirit is now walking the earth for that 3-day period, and they're not supposed to talk to him. Yeah. There's plenty written about that, and also, so this practice connects to the idea of being fooled by a demon, which is this, again, and through that connects to the practice of divination. Don't ask the spirits for advice because you might be fooled by a demon. So all of those things are kind of connected to the same admonition. There's also and this belief predates ancient Israel, that the spirits of the dead that are walking the earth for 3 days are not necessarily walking the earth for altruistic purposes. So you may end up with somebody who has a score to settle, for instance, kind of a thing. At least that was kind of the general thinking. So we've got Peter. We also have Lazarus. Why does Jesus wait for 3 days to go visit Lazarus? The reason is because nobody believed that a person was actually dead until that 3-day time period had passed. If not, you might be A, seeing their spirit, or B, maybe their spirit re-inhabited their body and they came back to life again. Do we think that's weird? Probably. But there's a whole history of practices that humanity used to make it so that people we thought had died but didn't could come back to life, could be rescued. I used to know the terms. A lot of our terms that we use, our sayings, our catchphrases, they come from things that we used to do to make sure that people who were not actually dead didn't die. For instance, working the graveyard shift is one of those. There was actually a graveyard shift because of the propensity for people to be buried but not have actually been dead. Everybody thought they were dead, but they weren't actually dead. So in the middle of the night, somebody's pounding on their coffin. Working the graveyard shift was the person who was in the graveyard so that if that happened, they could dig the person back up and they wouldn't die. They also used to bury people with a bell, right, and a string that went down into the coffin so you could ring the bell if you were not actually dead. So the idea that you're not actually dead for 3 days has some merit, because apparently, collectively, as a species, we really struggle sometimes to figure out if people are, in fact, actually dead, right? So that's kind of their practice. So why does Jesus wait for 3 days? Because this is a story about the power, God's power to resurrect. If Jesus who is God, goes to heal Lazarus prior to that 3 days, then it's a healing, not a resurrection. So you get this 3-day thing showing up over and over again. You get it with Christ as well. Christ died, and 3 days later rises from the dead, right? The 3-day period has passed. Christ is supposed to actually be dead by that point before the tomb opens and Christ comes back into the world. Doubting Thomas, not doubting that Jesus is there. He's doubting that Jesus is there in bodily form, which is why he touches the wounds, because he's essentially touching the body, seeing that this is actually Jesus' body. So why do I say all that? The scriptures support the idea that, yes, that is the thing. Now let me qualify that. Is it a thing in the way that History Channel documentaries around the time of Halloween try to make it a thing? Probably not. There's some shock and scare value that I think is a major part of pop culture. There's a huge element of pop culture surrounding heaven, for that matter, or hell even. A lot of what Christians believe about heaven and hell comes from the Divine Comedy by Dante, particularly Dante's Inferno, which is a part of the Divine Comedy. A lot of what we believe about hell comes from that and not from the Bible. So there's a lot of pop culture around both of those things. I think there's plenty of pop culture around this because people enjoy being scared. Let me rephrase that. Some people enjoy being scared. And because some people enjoy being scared, there's a lot of pop culture. But I think the scriptures do support the idea that absolutely there is what the secular world would call a supernatural existence. The religious people would call that the spiritual world. I'm not sure he was talking to me. Told you you'd get a long answer. All right, I've got... Oh, yeah. Now, to some degree, while there's a scary element to it, there's also a comforting element. And that comforting element is that the scriptures, in the idea of this 3 days and spirits of the dead walking before they go on to wherever and all that stuff, there's obvious and strong support for the idea that your soul goes on after you die, which can be comforting if we choose to look at it that way. All right, I got time for a couple of more if you have them. We're all super interested in Becky's conversation, though, so. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So the question, as I understand it, is what is hell from a biblical perspective, right? When Christ references it, he makes a correlation between hell and Gehenna. Gehenna being, which is the word that's actually translated to hell. Gehenna is a place where trash was burned outside of Jerusalem, so it's an actual physical location. And what he's trying to do is draw a correlation between what it is like to exist outside of relationship with God and that. It is that awful. The interesting thing about that is that the way the scriptures, let me say, process and teach that, is that you have this idea that there is a place of waiting between now and the second coming. This is not where the Catholic idea of purgatory comes from. There's a place of waiting between now and the second coming. And then, at the second coming, some people will be raised to eternity, while other people will go away, as in cease to exist. That's what Jesus is referring to when he talks about the two books in Revelation and the second death. The second death is not a Dante's Inferno kind of a hell, The way that is described, and you see this again when the demons, Jesus encounters a possessed man who's possessed by some demons, and the demons are like, it's not the appointed time, don't throw us into the pit. The pit has been a reference throughout the scriptures and outside of them for the second death, which is being wiped out of existence. So the idea there is that there is a time period in which created beings have the opportunity to choose to be in relationship with the God that created them. But should they choose not to, i.e. the end of all things, or what we call the second coming, Jesus raises those whose names are in the book of life, which is the same thing Jesus is referencing in, what is it, Matthew, my favorite passage. Many will come to me on that day, and you're going to know that, you're going to quote this. Someday you're going to be like, this is my favorite passage. Many will come to me on that day, and they'll say, Lord, didn't we do all these things in your name? And I'll say, get away from me, you evildoers, I never knew you. That statement is directly reflected in what Christ talks about regarding the book of life in Revelation. The book of life is a place where the names of the people that are known by Christ are written. So the issue is always, and always has been, do you know Christ, right? Are you choosing to be with Christ? Do you know Christ? For those who don't, there is, at that time, the second death, which is what is written about in Revelation. Why is all that so hard to figure out? Probably for 1,000 different reasons. But a better biblical understanding of hell is to stop existing. Our idea of, now Jesus references hell in terms of making a correlation with Gehenna, which is an actual place. It's not hard to find that. You can research it anywhere you want. But then, in American, no, that's not right. In Western culture, this biblical, which is a Middle Eastern idea of hell, ends up melding with the Norse concept of Hades, or the Greek concept of Hades. Greek concept of Hades merges with the Norse concept of hell, which is, incidentally, where the word hell comes from. Hell is a Norse god, or demigod. There is, okay, I'm going to get this wrong. I think, you'd have to look this up, but I think Hel is the daughter of Loki and one of the Titans. This is why you use the word. It's the reason, the origination of this word is this. There are 3 demigods. 2 of them, no, that's not true. You probably don't know any of them. One of them is Jormungandr, which is the world serpent. The other is Fenris. You may have heard that one. Fenris is the giant wolf. Have you ever heard the term Ragnarok thrown around with the Vikings show that came out? That was kind of popular. Okay, in Ragnarok, according to Norse mythology, all the gods fight. There's a major cataclysm. They all die, and then time starts over again. The whole thing starts because their time is cyclical. Ours is lineal. Theirs is cyclical, right? So Ragnarok is both an ending and a beginning. Here's what happens. Odin, who is considered the chief Asgardian god, fights Fenris, and Fenris kills him at Ragnarok. Thor fights Jormungandr, the world serpent, and Jormungandr kills him at Ragnarok. The third of those god beings was a giant boar called Hel. Hel's domain was, guess what? The Norse underworld. So when someone, I'm going to say this literally, not as a curse, but when someone would have said at that time and in that language, go to hell, that's not to go to a place originally. That is to go and be devoured by this giant boar god, which was a female, by the way. Then the place that she rules ends up taking her name. So hell itself is a Norse concept, but the Greco-Roman concept of Hades ends up merging with the Norse concept of hell when Christianity moves into Western Europe and is subsequently, like today, in many of the Norse countries, it would be what, probably Sweden, maybe? It's not Sweden. Iceland? I can't remember which one. It's like 99% Christian now. So you've got a major melding of those ideas. In fact, most of the Protestant Reformation, it comes from 2 places. One is from Martin Luther, same religious system, affected Germany. I'll blow your mind in just a minute, if I haven't already. So Martin Luther is responsible for the Protestant Reformation. And, my brain is not working. Zwingli is one. And then the Baptists, the person, I cannot remember the name, Calvin, John Calvin. John Calvin was a Swiss theologian who believed heavily in the idea of fate. Fate is a Norse concept. So when you have a version of Christianity, versions of Christianity that come out of Norse culture, after Christianity meets with Norse culture, they develop a version of fate that they end up calling predestination. So all of the churches that believe in predestination that way, that comes out of the Norse idea of fate, which is a result of John Calvin, who was a Swiss theologian. Germany and the further Norse countries essentially follow the same set of gods, and you have days devoted to them in your week and probably don't even know it, right? For instance, all of the days of the week were originally devoted to worshiping a different deity. The Sunday was devoted to, you can do this, the sun. Monday was devoted to the moon, right? All right, Tuesday. Tears. Tuesday was Tears Day. Tears Day, which is a female Norse god. Now, Wednesday. Did you ever wonder why Wednesday is spelled W-E-D-N? The way that you say Odin's name in the northernmost Norse countries is Odin. The way you say his name in Germany is Woden. Wednesday is Woden's Day. Guess what? The way you say Thor's name in the upper north countries is Thor. The way you say his name in Germany is Thur. So you have Woden's Day followed by Thursday. Then you have Freya's Day, which is Friday, which is another female Norse god. And then Saturday is a carryover from Roman mythology. It is a day that we're supposed to, if I remember correctly, worship Saturn. So all of those things are a part of our culture, and usually most of that's lost on us. So what is, hell comes from that. And because so much of the Christianity that is practiced in America, so heavily influenced by the Christianity that came out of Western Europe, the Christianity of Western Europe evolved when the original Christianity of the Middle East comes into Norse culture and then starts to change a bit. There was another major version of Christianity. The two major versions of Christianity that develop in Europe are a Norse version of it and a Celtic version of it. The Celtic version of it gets squashed by the Roman Catholic Church. So the Norse version of it ends up being the version that moves forward. So a lot of if you add into that the ideas about hell, which was a natural association for converted Norse Christians to make, this is a place where you go when you die, oh, that must be hell. They just start reappropriating that word, and now it's a part of your normal vocabulary, right? So when you read in Greek, the word hell it's not there. That's what we translate it to in English, yeah. Yes. Yep. There you go. That's the answer. What is purgatory? Yeah. No, what you're referring to is that Paul writes that our sins will not keep us out of heaven. Our sins will be purified away from us as if by fire. That is essentially the teaching that leads to the doctrine of purgatory, that when you die, it's your relationship to God in Christ by the power of the Spirit that is what gets you to heaven, not how good you were. But you may not be good enough to get into the presence of God. This is Roman Catholic theology, right? So there's a place you wait while your sin is purged from you so that you'll be clean enough to go into the presence of God. Now here's where the Roman Catholic Church went. They said this process could be sped up the more people that are praying for you while you're there, right? So Protestants don't pray for the dead. And this is the reason why. A major split in the Protestant Reformation away from the Catholic Church was over this issue. But a lot of it was because, here's how it evolved. Your loved one will get out of purgatory and into heaven faster the more people that will pray for them. We, as the church, will devote more people to praying for them the more money you give, because then we can, allot more people to that praying process, which came to be known as an indulgence, the process of indulgences. So people would give money. Entire monasteries would come together and pray for these dead people so they could get out of purgatory faster. How do they know when they're out of purgatory? I have no idea. None whatsoever. All right, friends, we're at 11:30. I'll take one last question if you have one, but I've been doing so well lately at getting you out on time through the last several months. I don't want to ruin that on my last day. All right, let's pray together. God, we're grateful for our time together and the opportunity to have learned and grown. We're grateful, God, for all that you have taught us and for all that what we have learned has opened up in our own hearts and lives. Pray, God, that as we leave this place today, we would take just one more step toward becoming the people you're calling us to be. This we ask in your name. Amen. Thank you for coming.